Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Emilie Richards, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, this is Patricia McLinn. I'm delighted to have Emilie Richards here today for this edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. I got to know Emilie when she moved to Arlington, Virginia, some number of years ago.
Yeah, really.
When I was living there, already living there, and Emilie was a very well-established, very well-known romance author, very much respected. And it was my pleasure and delight to get to know her. And then she and Diane Chamberlain and I all lived in the area. All of us had dogs, and we all understood that. So we'd get together once a month and have dinner together and talk writing and the business and all the vagaries of being an author. And now none of us live in the area. We've all gone different directions, but we stay in touch. The other thing I was thinking about this beforehand, Emilie, is the workshop that we did at a Romance Writers of America National Conference called Writing from the Inside Out or the Outside In. And it was such a clear delineation of how differently we approach things.
Boy, that's true.
And we'll probably get into this again later, but I remember very vividly that Emilie had this very neatly typed out talk and followed it and, was all organized. And I had mine with arrows crossed out and little added notes to the side and, move this here and change that. And that's very much how the difference in how we create. But I know you. Let's let the readers and the listeners know you a little bit more. So we're just going to do some fun questions here. Do you have a favorite color and why?
Well, Pat, you and I've had this discussion. I love purple and hate orange, and you love orange and hate purple.
Yep. We do.
And why do I love
We're opposites
purple?
in other ways.
I don't know. There's just something calming, and it goes to me. It's almost a neutral. It goes with everything.
No. But I was thinking that, that's interesting because purple is calming, and I like the vibrancy of orange. That you may have hit on something there. Okay, favorite taste.
Favorite taste? Oh, salt and vinegar potato chips.
Have you held any surprising jobs?
When I saw that question, I thought, man, I did have one that was really strange. I worked as a temp during college in the summers, and I got assigned to the NRA, to their mailroom, because I was living in Washington, D.C., and I would have to open up the envelopes. All this money would fall out. People were just so involved and so supportive, and they would send these dirty dollar bills, and it was a real eye-opener for me to work there. I was there for 3 days, and I remember them very well.
Wow. I had never heard that story. So that is a great news story. This is one of the great things about doing this podcast is learning more things about people I know.
That's good.
So that's really fun. Yeah. Do you have any strong fears, and do you use them in books?
I am afraid of high bridges, and which is one of those odd things since I grew up in Florida and I'm living here now again. And there are, as you can imagine, a lot of bridges.
Yes.
And I know where the fear comes from because my parents used to fish on bridges when I was a child. And so they put the fear of God into me about, being careful when I was on the bridges with them. But have I ever used it in a book? I would have said no, except that I just re-edited one of my older romances. And there's a scene in the book, which is off scene, but it's discussed, where somebody drives off of a high bridge and dies. So I guess I have used it.
Do you access the feeling that you get on a bridge to convey characters' fear?
Probably not consciously.
No, but maybe
Could
underneath.
be.
I always remember I was out west and was across this bridge over really a gorge, and I had seen a sign where it said 900 feet, that it was 900 feet below. And then you went a little farther onto the bridge and there was a sign that said no fishing, which made me laugh. I couldn't imagine you'd have to have 902 feet of line.
I love that. It's too bad you didn't have a photo of that.
I know. It was the days before having a camera all the time with you.
You know what's interesting, Pat, it just an aside, is that I've talked to two other well-known writers, both of whom are afraid of bridges, and both of them one lives here in Florida and the other lives in South Carolina. So I don't know if there's, this is a common fear among writers, or if I just happen to run across the only two who are, but I thought that was interesting.
Now, I don't like where you cannot tell where the road goes, and sometimes that happens on bridges. But I had somebody tell me that was not a fear, that was a rational reaction.
I like that.
Well, I suspect that's because that person also felt the same way about it.
Sure. I know exactly what you mean, though.
Can you share with us a childhood book that addicted you to stories?
Well, I was a huge fan of the Oz books, all of the Oz books. And our library was like a one-room library. For the children's room was one room. Boy, I can just picture it so clearly, the way it smelled and the way the books felt. But these old Oz books were all first editions with the original illustrations, and they were I couldn't get enough of them. I read them, I reread them, I checked them out, I read them again. And I think that a lot of my love of stories started there.
I read those. Actually, my sister read them out loud to me. She was home from college and I was in second grade, I think. And I had back to back, I had the measles and then the mumps, or the mumps and then the measles. And so I remember all those stories where the scarecrow was running Oz, right?
For a while, yeah, he did. Of course, there was Ozma, who started life as a boy and turned into a girl. Or actually started as a girl, turned into a boy, and then turned into a girl. I mean, there was just all these little twists and turns and fun things. I just loved it.
Yeah. Do you have any stories that you can remember from your pre-author days that you mentally rewrote the ending for because you thought it just wasn't right?
Well, I think the classic one would be Gone with the Wind. I think every romantic person in the world came up with her own scenario of what happened after Rhett Butler stormed out of the house. And that was the first thing that leapt to mind, was how many times and how many different ways I rewrote that story.
Do you have a favorite way? And the way you ended that you ended it?
Well, probably not. I think the fun was in doing.
That's a really insightful thing about writing too, that you need to have the fun in the doing.
If it's not fun, there's no point.
There are I often say there are a lot of easier ways to make a living, including, some bad jobs, but
easier, but not as much fun.
True. How about Emilie? Have you had things that, like, earlier in your life that really got to you? Maybe you fretted over them. You gave them a lot of thought, and now you think, who cares?
I think this is incredibly boring, because I imagine almost everybody listening can identify with this, but that whole sense of needing to fit in and always feeling like I was always a step ahead or a step behind or a step to the side, maybe. And I think part of that is being the kind of person who turns into an author. I was always analyzing things and looking for details and trying to figure things out, or rewriting scenarios in my mind. And that's probably not the easiest way to fit in. Now, of course, I don't really care because, again, I found my group of people I want to fit in with, but also it's not a driving force in my life. I am happy with who I am. And I wish I had been happier with myself and understood myself better as an adolescent, but that's part of what being an adolescent is.
Oh, very true. Very true. And you touched on part of being what an author is, the kind of person an author is. How do you think authors are? I'm guessing you do think authors tend to be different from...
I do.
I want to say normal people.
I think can say normal people. I do think we're different. And I think it takes us many, many years to realize that not everybody thinks about the world or analyzes the world or tries to figure out what's happening in every incident in their life, what's behind it, and how they can twist it around to make it work a different way or fantasize about it. That's just not something everybody does. And I think once you realize it is a little different. And that's kind of an interesting moment in your life when you go like, oh, I'm doing this because I'm a writer. And that's a good feeling, really.
Mm-hmm. I remember when my second book came out, it was set in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is my dad's hometown. And my sister-in-law had read it, and we'd spent time walking the beach in Gloucester at various family reunions. And she said, now I know why you were noting all those details. I never understood why you would say, oh, look at that house and see how the ocean goes this way around here and that way around there.
Because it was important to you and not necessarily so to her. And I'm sure you stored it up and used it.
Yep. So it finally made sense to her. And I was like, oh.
I really think that if everybody could take who they are and understand it and understand that it's okay and that it probably is going to figure into their future, it would help so much. But just the moment you realize that all those things that you've thought and done were really helping you become the person who can, in this case, write books or for someone else, play the piano or teach math in college or whatever, those are the things that made you that person. I think we'd all be a lot more relaxed with ourselves.
Isn't that the truth? And appreciate those things and as you said, as an adolescent, they make you different. And that's really hard to appreciate as an adolescent because you want to be just like all the other people. But then those are the ones that you build on to create a life.
And I think if you're lucky as an adult and you feel good about yourself, you can look back on that and go, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. That was all part of becoming who I am. And that's great.
Yeah. And this sort of segues from that, being an adolescent and learning those lessons. Do you remember sayings that your mother or your father using that you can hear yourself coming out with now?
Well, I hate to get political, but you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, comes to mind. So that I find myself saying that a lot these days.
Do you have, I do, I know, bad habit words when you're writing?
The one that just comes to mind right away is thing. I use it so much in speech. I say thing. And when I go back and edit, there are so many things in my work. I have to get rid of all the things.
And I have previously admitted that mine just and really are very bad for me. And very comes in too. And I go back and I think, there is no way I use this word this many times.
And we can actually sort of do a count using our word processing programs. And that's a frightening thing.
It's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying, especially because at least I'm conscious of it. I know which ones are my bad ones. And then there'll be an additional one or two that crop up kind of ad hoc in each book. Yeah.
Book that I just edited. I first had a professional editor look at it because I liked the story, but I knew there were things wrong with it. And she must have taken out 500 incidences of the word, terror, terrified, terror-stricken. And yes, she had every reason to be afraid, but it did get pounded down everybody on the head. So, and I don't think I normally do that. But in that book, I apparently liked the word and used it many, many times.
We all do it. Those of us who are good take them out.
Get somebody who's got a better eye than we do to take them out for us.
Yes, that helps. Okay, what 3 movies are you going to take with you to my wonderful desert island that oddly will let you play movies but only allows you to have 3?
This is one strange island. Okay. Well, I mean, having already told you about my Oz experiences, I would have to say The Wizard of Oz, which I am never, ever tired of watching. I love The Wizard of Oz. I really do. Then I was looking for something more recent, and I couldn't come up with anything too recent, although I just saw Coco the Disney cartoon, and it was just fabulous. I wouldn't mind having Coco with me. But the one that came to mind was an odd romance called Monsoon Wedding, which is set in India. And I just loved that movie. And I think I would really love having that movie and watching it over and over again. There was so many interesting things and so much honest emotion, and I really loved it. So I guess that's 3 right there.
That's terrific. Okay, we have a question here from a reader, and I'm curious about this because I think I know what it used to be in Arlington, but I'd like to hear, and now that you've left Northern Virginia, what is your favorite place to write and why? Does it have an inspirational view?
Oh, that's a great question. The less inspirational view, the better. When we moved into this house, which is in Florida, there was a beautiful den in the back of the house with a gorgeous view of a pond and woods and no houses. It's just gorgeous with all kinds of birds and alligators, and I loved it. And I absolutely everybody said you have to use this as your study, and I kept thinking, I'm not sure. But I gave it a try, and about 2 years later, I said, I cannot write in this room. It was too distracting. It was also too close to the center of things going on in the house. And so I secluded myself in the front bedroom, which actually has 2 doors between me and the world. It was a lot of work to move, and it was the best thing I ever did. And my view is the side of my neighbor's house doesn't even have any windows. And I just love it. It's perfect.
I had a choice in this house of whether to be at the front of the house or at the back, and I chose the back. And I do have windows, but I look at the top of trees, into trees. So I knew if I had that room in the front, I would be watching all the activity on the street and everything. The downside is I managed to choose the room that is the coldest in the winter and the hottest in the summer.
Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad.
But no distractions.
Yeah, and the distractions are big for me. And I know that there are people who really want to be in a beautiful environment, but I find that what I really want to look at is my video monitor. And that's all I want to see. I don't want to be thinking about anything else. I just want to do that.
So do you watch the words as they appear on the screen? Do you need that visual?
And I don't know if you do this, but I go back and edit. I know I've read all the books and say you shouldn't do this, and I don't care. It works for me. I go back and edit sentence by sentence over and over again as I write. I don't want to leave something that I'm uncomfortable with in any way, because then it inhibits me from moving forward. So I work on sentences until I have them the way I want them. And of course, there's many more edits that happen during, until the book is published. At a certain point, I know it's good enough and I'll move on. But until then, I really can't move on.
Yeah, I'm changing things around. I'm probably not as polished as you before I move on, because I write a sequence, and so I'll jump around. I will, if something's really flowing, but I know I don't have the right word, or I need a little something, I will use brackets, and WD is my thing for, look for a better word, or check CHK, or, I do different things to alert myself, but always in the brackets to come back to. But if I could not cut and paste, I could not write. I have to be able to move things around. And I don't understand how people can dictate, because you start thinking along one line and then you realize, but where I ended up in this paragraph is really where it should have started. And I have to then cut and paste and move that. I
and then you have to do it right then while you're thinking about it, instead of saying, oh, I'm sure I'll catch it later. No, I won't catch it later, because I won't go and I won't get any farther, because it'll still be on my mind.
That's a really good point, that you kind of have to, it has to clear the hurdle in your mind, and then you can keep moving on. So another reader asks, question that is, it's going to be a 2 parts. The first part is from the reader, and where do your stories come from? And she says, I know one author who dreams her stories. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?
Everyone is different. And I think that's insightful in itself, that we have to realize that we're not going to do everything the same way every time. And so if you're waiting to dream it you may not dream it. If you're waiting for a character to take over a conversation in your head, that may not happen. You have to really, I think, you have to be on the lookout for story everywhere. But, the old what if thing is, I don't know how many times somebody has said something to me and I think, well, that's interesting, but what if? And then I'm off and running. And that can be a little snippet of conversation. It can be an article in the paper, which is a great source. Want ads are wonderful.
Great. Fascinating.
There's just all these things, and you can, but that's how my stories are born. And sometimes it's a character, sometimes it's an event. Sometimes it's a setting. And interestingly enough, the last book I wrote called The Swallow's Nest, which came out this summer, it was really the story of the nesting behavior of swallows. And that sort of just suggested the entire story to me. So you just almost never know.
Do you find that a book is easier or harder to write depending on where the story came from initially?
No, I don't. I think that whatever the initial ideas and whatever the catalyst for that story was, your mind takes over and you do so much twisting and turning and how about this and no, and maybe they would have done that. No, this. So it's almost like the idea. In fact, an awful lot of times the idea itself is just doesn't even show up in the story. I mean, the catalyst, that the thing that got you thinking to start with doesn't even end up in the book. I think that that's important for people to know, that you don't really have to use it. You have to use it to help you move forward into a story.
Have you ever used the same catalyst in more than one book?
Ooh, that's a good question. Have I ever used the same catalyst? Well, in the sense that I've done a series, I did a series about quilters and quilts set in the Shenandoah Valley. And the quilt that features in each story really has a lot to do with the story, the way that it's pieced or whatever. And so that I use the same the same basic catalyst, although each one was a little different.
Is there anything that you're really good at that some people might not know you're really good at?
Probably not. I mean, I'm a mediocre.
Oh, I know. Quilting.
I'm a mediocre quilter.
You are a fabulous quilter.
Well, I like quilting. And I really enjoy the process a lot. I also really like music. I started out, my plan was to become a musician, and at one time a music educator, another time a music therapist. I pursued both of those and realized that I didn't love it enough. And you really have to love it a lot. But I've had a lot of fun recently because I've had an opportunity to get to know some young people who are on their way to the top in the music field. And so I've been able to draw on some of my old experiences, and that's really been fun. So I would say music more than quilting, because I wrote about quilting, but I've never really written about music.
Do you think you will write about music?
Probably not. For the same reasons I didn't pursue it as a career. I did write a book about a singer-songwriter, a popular singer-songwriter, and that was fun. But that's a whole different genre than I was involved with.
I was thinking that people have said to me, "Oh, why don't I write about newspaper journalists or people, particularly at the Washington Post?" And especially people would say that about write a romance sitting there. I go, "It's not romantic; it's work." What are you talking about?
Sometimes you know too much, don't you?
Yeah,
you know too much to be able to fudge.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the idea of the catalyst. How many titles have you had published?
I think it's 75 at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, lots and lots. Romances, mysteries, and most recently women's fiction, and that's single title women's fiction.
Have you found with the different genres or at different stages in your career, have the catalysts been different or harder to come by? Or I'm just wondering if there's an ebb and flow in your career or in the genres you're working on with how the ideas come.
I don't think so. I think the ideas are there and you have to decide how you want to slot those ideas, and whether this would make a better mystery, whether it would make better women's fiction, whether it would make a good romance, or whatever you're writing at that moment that you particularly like. So you'll sometimes toss out good ideas, good catalysts, because it won't fit where you are at that moment. But I think honestly you can take a catalyst and you can turn it and twist it. But yeah, no, I think it just all depends on what's going on in terms of what you're writing and how you want to frame that catalyst and change it.
Okay, so when you have the idea, you have that catalyst, then how do you go from that initial spark, catalyst, spark, to a book?
Well, I think you start thinking about the idea and all the possibilities. And for me, that includes writing them down. I have what I call a scenes and revelations file. And I imagine scenes using whatever the idea is, and I just put them in there. I imagine things that characters will learn from the process of the story, throughout the story, and I put those in there. That takes a long time to do. We're not talking about something you do overnight. It's weeks and weeks of that. You'll be washing the dishes, and suddenly you'll say, "Oh, wait, I can just see her saying this and this happening," and you try to write it down. And then I get pages of those scenes and those revelations, and then I start kind of putting them in an order, like this would happen first, and there would be something that would need to happen between this, and maybe it would be this, and I'll add things, and that's kind of the way I work.
But you're doing that during the writing process, or during?
No, that's before. That's before I start writing. Yeah. And yeah, because by the time, I know this is very different from the way you work, but by the time I sit down to work on the actual story, chapter 1, scene 1, I have already got pages and pages of ideas that I have taken and put into order. And then I write them into a synopsis, which is a requirement if you're working for a traditional publishing company. Mm-hmm. But I would do it anyway because I'm one of those very few authors that love to write a synopsis. And because I like telling the story and then finding the holes at this point, and putting it all together. And then I more or less divide it into chapters, either in my head or on paper. And then I start writing. I don't start writing until I have everything organized. That doesn't mean I don't make changes. It doesn't mean that my characters don't make changes. But when I sit down to write, I feel very secure that I have something to do that day, and that I'm going towards an ending that I like, that I'm moving, and that there'll be things happening in the middle that are important. So for me, that's really important. But I do all that work up front.
Have you had this process from the beginning, or is this something that's developed over writing 75 titles?
I think the scenes and revelations, I was doing an informal version of that for years, I think, but I institutionalized that probably 15 or 20 years ago and started doing it that way. So I think I've always written this way. I think I've written this way that maybe it hasn't been as sort of scheduled and figured out, but I've always written. I've always been organized. I've always wanted to know where I was going. I really think if I just sat down and started to write, I'd still be working on my first book, and it would be 9 million pages long.
But what a great read it would be.
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, working with this sort of process, do you have unfinished projects or things that you put aside that just didn't quite gel for you?
I've had unfinished. Let's say I've had ideas. I've had a new book. I've had the last book of series, 2 different series that I knew there had to be one more book, and my publisher didn't agree. So I have those. Yeah, I know those 2 books are, up in the air. There was another book. It's actually part of one that I just edited. Part of the series I just edited, one of my really old romance series, because the person who was the hero in that book had a drug bust in his past, and they said I couldn't write about somebody with a drug bust in his past. So there've been, and that was very well thought out, and I had a synopsis for that, and they couldn't see their way around that. So every once in a while, I've been stymied by publishers, which is fine. I appreciate that they have their own rules and their own thoughts about how these things should go. I'm delighted that we now have independent publishing, so that if we don't agree, we can do things on our own. And I'm delighted so that some of the ideas I've had in the past will show up now.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, and I'm working on one of those now. So that's really fun.
That sort of leads to another question from a reader who asked if we miss characters when we finish a book and think about them.
Yeah, do we miss characters?
Yeah.
Yeah, every once in a while. And it's funny. The last book I wrote, I did not miss those characters, even though I liked the book. But the one before that, I really, really missed those characters, one in particular. And I just really wanted her in my life again. And I was so sorry that she wasn't going to be there. It took me a while to get over that. That it's a strange event, but it does happen.
Do you think you might ever come back and write another book that would allow her to come back into your life?
No.
No.
I really felt like I told that story, and there really isn't another story to tell. So I had to say goodbye to her, but that's okay.
You're tougher than I am. I'd find a way to sneak her in. Okay, this is a sort of out of the blue question, but I'm curious about the answer. What's the best money you ever spent as a writer?
The best money I ever spent as a writer was the first time I went to the Romantic Times conference. It was in New York City. I had just sold my first book, and I was going to meet my editor and my agent in New York. And I was so scared. Oh my gosh, this was a dream I had of selling a book. And now not only had I sold it, I was going to go and be with other authors and meet these professionals who were in charge of my life, my professional life. But it was it really made a difference. I found that meeting people face to face and having conversations with them really increased my clout, both with my agent and my editor, and was just probably the best money I've ever spent. And I found in years to come, going to conferences remained the most important thing I could spend money on.
And is that for meeting the industry professionals?
Not anymore. It was for many, many years. Now it's more for getting information about the changing publishing market and the whole publishing world. And you can get that best in person from your fellow writers and from other professionals who speak at conferences. I don't really need to meet with my editor and my agent so much as I need to learn, what I should be doing to enhance my career.
I want to go back because I'm not sure I know the answer to this. Now, you said you wanted to be in music or possibly music therapy. How did you get from there to starting to write?
I did get a master's degree. I finished my undergraduate in American Studies, and then I got a master's degree in marriage and family development, which included mostly counseling classes. So before I even graduated, I got a job working as a therapist or a mental health worker in a mental health center. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I did a couple of other social service positions. We tended to move around. At the last move, I usually had a baby when we moved so that I would be in a situation where I really couldn't go out and look for work until the baby was older. And this was the fourth move like that. And I decided that I really needed something I could do at home just for me because I had 4 children. My husband was a minister and he was away a lot. We weren't living near the church, so we didn't have much of a community. And I knew I needed something to do. So I started writing. Actually, oddly enough, Michael came home from doing a funeral and said he'd met this woman who was making her living writing fantasy game scenarios. Now, how I jumped from fantasy game scenarios to writing romances is a long story, but it was the proverbial light bulb going on over my head. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to write. And since I had no idea how to do it, I went to the library and got every book they had on writing. This was in New Orleans, and there was a nice shelf full, and I read them all. And I just started writing. I wrote a children's story, which was published. I wrote a confession, which wasn't published. I just tried a lot of different things. And then the romance market was just beginning to really blossom about then. And I discovered that and decided that was a great place to try my hand. And I never looked back.
A lot of your romances have a lot of depth to them. But did you find that going from the romance to the single title, how was that as an adjustment? How did that affect your writing? Or question. Call on different writing from you?
It really didn't, because back in the day when I started writing romances, we had a whole lot of latitude in terms of subject and the way that we explore things. So I was really writing women's fiction within the romance genre, I think. And of course, it had more love scenes and more romance. The relationship between the man and the woman was paramount. But I always had a lot of other things going on too. And eventually I got to the point where the other things were taking over and I needed to move out of that. But it just felt like it was a training ground for single title too. I mean, I didn't feel like it was a hugely different thing. Although the first single title I wrote was a really more of a sort of a historical family saga about civil rights and in Louisiana. And so that was
tell the titles.
Yeah.
Share the titles.
That was Iron Lace and Rising Tides. We broke it into 2 books because it was about 1,000-page manuscript. So when I went into single title, I did it with a vengeance, thinking it was going to be incredibly different from what I'd been writing. But what I learned was it really wasn't. All the same rules applied. It was just longer, and I could explore other facets of women's lives other than the romance. And I loved that. But I felt like I had great training in the romance genre.
It's not the writer, it's a step back from that, looking at your books. I think there's a lot about the relationships among women. Are you conscious of that? Would you agree? Not agree?
Absolutely agree. I mean, the Shenandoah album novels, which are about quilters in the Shenandoah Valley, it's their relationships, also their relationships with men in their individual lives. But then I wrote a series of 4 books, which should have been 5, for the guy, about a group of women in Asheville, North Carolina, who specifically band together to help other women. It's called the Goddesses Anonymous series. And so that really is about their relationships and the way that women relate to other women.
Yeah, the network of the women is the web that brings the books together, and then the women have these individual lives, of course, that often include men.
They often, almost always do. But there's always some sort of social issue too. Although I don't ever set out to say I'm going to write about homelessness. So let me come up with a story. I never do that. That just sort of evolves in my books. I come up with the relationship and the things I want to explore with that before I get into all the other facets.
Do you do a lot of research?
Oh, I do tons of research.
Do you like it or dread it?
I love research. I really, really love it. I don't love it when I can't find answers. And that's rare, but sometimes it's just the most frustrating thing in the world. And that happened to me recently. Can I tell you that one real quick?
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
The Swallow's Nest takes place, this is the book that came out last June, takes place in San Jose. And I went out to San Jose twice and researched. And it has a whole legal issue in the background of the story. It's a child custody novel. And I had all this stuff online about child custody. And I realized after weeks of working on this that I really didn't know what I was doing. Even though I had all the statutes, I had so many resources, it just wasn't making sense to me. And I was literally pounding my head on the computer screen. I finally decided I had to talk to a lawyer, a family law attorney in that area. And I started contacting people and they just ignored me. Nobody even answered my emails. And so I'm thinking I'm going to have to hire somebody, have to pay their $300 an hour or whatever to talk to them about this. And I sent one more email out. And this lawyer got back to me and said, I would love to talk to you. This really sounds like fun. And it turns out she wants to be a writer too. She wants to do some writing. So I called her and we were on the phone for 2 hours. It was magnificent. She was the nicest person ever to take that much time with me and to straighten me out. It made all the difference. But until I was able to have that conversation with her and get my questions answered, I was so frustrated. And that does happen sometimes. Mostly you can get answers, but sometimes you have to really go to the mat to find them.
But finding a source like that always makes me feel like that scene in Rocky at the top of the steps. You're like, yes.
Well, you do a lot of research for your books too, so you must have had similar kinds of experiences.
Yes, I do a lot of the initial research online, but then I find talking to people gives it a depth and aspects that you'd never think of. So I love doing that.
Anecdotes that come up. Yes. You may not use that exact anecdote, but it certainly inspires things that you can use.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Was the rest of the writing process with the book, where would it put that book in your a joy to write
It was
continuum?
way down at the bottom. It was because of that, and here's the thing I have discovered, and I think you probably have too, is that how much pain you go through with an individual book has nothing to do with how good it is. So if you've suffered and you really sort of hate the book by the time you're done, it's not going to show the readers are not going to see that. They're going to see the book that you carefully crafted, and even when you were tearing out your hair, you were still doing what you needed to as a professional to write a good story. And then the books that sort of write themselves and you think, oh, this one's going to be a hit. People like it, but no better than the one that you tore your hair out over. So, you don't know. You just keep working.
So which of your books would you say was the highest on the joy to write continuum?
Well, I would say recently it would have been When We Were Sisters. And and I think part of the reason is that I wrote it in first person and from 3 different points of view, and which is why I loved writing I wrote a 5-book mystery series, The Ministry is Murder Mysteries, and they were all in first person. And I absolutely loved writing in first person.
A lot of fun.
They were, and I wanted badly to write The Swallow's Nest in first person, but I couldn't. I tried it, didn't work. I knew it wasn't working. And so I had to go back to third person. The new book I'm about to write, called The Perfect Daughter, which is another Mira, that's my publisher, is going to be in first person. And that I'm really looking forward to writing this book. And I think that's a big part of the reason why.
Why do you find in first person that?
I think it's that you're really so deeply into the character's head that they really begin talking through you. They don't really, we know that, but that's how it feels. And it puts you in a different zone. For me, it just puts me in a new zone, and all kinds of things come out that I never knew that I had thought or experienced, and they just show up. And it's sort of revelatory. I just really enjoy it.
When you were writing the book with the 3 first person sections in it, did you have any tricks or things that you did to help you shift from one to the other? It would feel sort of like playing multiple roles in a play.
That's good to ask, and I'm not sure that I did. I might have needed to more. But I just sort of, it was just clear to me that it was time for this new person to speak, and I would just sort of jump into their head, and there I would be. I do think that when you do that, you have to be careful that you're making it clear to the reader that someone else is speaking now. They're in someone else's head. There's ways to do that.
So this is a little change. I'm curious about this. What is your relationship with reviews?
I have been really lucky with reviews, and I do think a lot of it's luck. Reviewers tend to like me. I think reviewers sometimes like me better than readers do. And reviewers and editors like my work. And so I have had mostly good reviews, and that's been great. When I get really bad reviews, there's sort of 2 categories of bad reviews. There's the really wretched, crotchety person who wouldn't like it no matter who had written it. And then there's people who are very insightful, and they see things that I didn't in the book, problems, and they can be really helpful if you can divorce yourself from that, from the feeling aghast that somebody didn't love everything you did. You can learn some things about your writing that are helpful. So I would say that my relationship with the reviews is really pretty good.
Now, you said you thought maybe reviewers liked your books more than readers, but I've been at events with you, and you have incredibly loyal and delighted readers and delightful readers. Do you have any stories about interacting with your readers?
What I really like the most when I get emails or people will tell me at events that something I wrote, it's changed their life in some way. And I think we've all had this. I don't think it's in any way me. I think it's something that happens when readers put themselves into a story, and something that is happening with the characters rings a bell for them, and they suddenly realize that, wow, this is relevant to my life, and I have been thinking about my life in the wrong way, just like this character has. And so those moments are so wonderful, because I sometimes feel like, I've I write because I love it so much, and I should be doing more for other people, but I'm doing all this for myself. So when I get in a situation where somebody says your book changed my life, and they give me specific examples, it's just wonderful. I think, oh, maybe I haven't been wasting their time. Maybe I've just been, frolicking around at the computer. Maybe this really has meaning for people, and that's really special.
That is terrific. And the idea that it can go on, that you've written the book, it's been out now, but it could be read 20 years from now and have an effect on people. So
that's an odd thought, but yes, it could be.
With a women's fiction in particular, what would you say is the biggest thing that people think they know about the genre that they're wrong about?
Boy, that's a good question. I am not sure I have an answer to that. I think people, well, Pat, I don't know. It just sort of, there's all kinds of women's fiction. There's chick lit, and people who like chick lit believe that, people who are looking at it from the outside think it's all froth and silly and it has nothing to say to people. And they may feel that way about the more serious kinds of women's fiction too. I think women's fiction is more, a commercial women's fiction is probably more transformative than people like to think it is. It's just not a breezy read. It can be, but it can also be nitty gritty and really help people deal with things that are going on in their lives. And I think that's probably something people don't think about when they hear the words women's fiction.
That's a really good point. Yeah, but I don't think of it as necessarily frothy at all.
But you're in the business.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear from another reader who says, when the cover image doesn't match the character description, and the reader acknowledges that that's a pet peeve of hers, how does it feel for the author?
Oh, it's just ghastly. It really is. Although I have to say that these days, I rarely get people on my covers. Now, the last two covers for my women's fiction have had women on them, but I've been given the joy of helping pick out the models because they've done cover shoots. So they do look like my characters. I've made sure of that. But boy, in the old days when they would just plop a cover in front of you and say, this is your cover. And you'd look at it and you go like, this person is nothing like my person. Yeah. That was depressing, especially with men. It was worse with men when you'd have a really sexy, gorgeous guy that you've been writing about, and the slob shows up on your cover. And I had a guy, I swear I had a guy that looked like Johnny Cash, but not the young, Johnny Cash. And I was like, okay, really? And there was nothing we could do about it.
No, I had a rodeo cowboy, and he was a bull rider who tend to be wiry, and this guy on the cover is like a sumo wrestler. I don't know where he came from.
Get up,
like, what? What? The bull would just give up.
But it's almost like you're breaking the trust of the reader when you've been telling the reader that this guy was gorgeous and he looked like this and he did these things and the hair was, and then you see the guy on the cover and you think, she must be a total doofus to follow this guy. And that's not really what you want your readers to think.
No, that is not the optimal impression. And now that I'm bringing my books out myself, almost all of mine have objects or flowers or something, landscapes on the cover.
I applaud that.
That's mostly because I just don't want to be so frustrated trying to find people who are not quite right. So I have low tolerance for frustration. And this might actually be somewhat of a segue to the next question from a reader. So if you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Oh, well, I'd like to work with J.K. Rowling.
Oh.
Wouldn't that be fun? What an incredible, vivid imagination, ability to see the world in a different dimension, and also just apparently a very astute, caring, alert kind of person. I just think that would be fabulous. I'd love that. I'm a big Harry Potter fan anyway, so that would be super. I'd love that.
You may have already answered it, but let's see if we can get more. What do you read for fun?
And boy, I read everything. And this year, for fun, and this is maybe not everybody's idea of fun, but I've been reading books for the Better World bookstore reading challenge for 2017. They put out a list. I think I'm looking at it right now, maybe 15 or 20 books on this list. Things like read a food memoir, read a book you picked based on the cover, read a book based on a fairy tale. I'm reading one based on Hansel and Gretel right now to finish this list. I want to finish it by the end of the year. And that's great because it's got me reading a really wide variety of genres. I've read everything from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich to Riders of the Purple Sage.
Wow.
So I do really read all over the map.
So, and you find that fun even when it is a book like Rise and Fall of the Third Reich?
I picked that because I felt I really needed to read it. And it fit perfectly in a category. It was a National Book Award winner. We needed to read one. Nobody's looking at me. Nobody's ever going to see my answers here. This is just for me and to give me a chance to read across a wide variety of genres and to pick out some books that I wanted to read but didn't have a good excuse to read before, like The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it. In fact, I've enjoyed it so much, I'm going to start my own reading challenge in 2018 with my readers, and I think that's going to be neat.
Oh, that should be very interesting. Yeah.
We've been putting together a list of because it's 2018, we put together a list of 18 different categories that people can, that can choose books for. And not that they have to read them all or that they ever have to do this at all, but we just thought, and we, meaning a group of my readers, thought that it would really be fun to do. So we're going to try it.
So they're contributing some of the categories?
Yeah, absolutely. I gave them my ideas and they made suggestions on those, and then they came up with some new ones. So it's been kind of a back and forth. It's been fun.
That sounds terrific. I love that idea. Somebody who has never read any of your books, where is the best place or a couple best places for them to start to be introduced to you as a writer?
I think you should probably start with my most recent books and move backwards. But if they have a specific, and that would be The Swallow's Nest and When We Were Sisters. But the books before that, there were 4 books that were all part of the Goddesses Anonymous series. And if people like connected books, that's a good series. Then there were the Shenandoah album series. And then there were 2 books that were connected that were set in Cleveland. So, or if they like mysteries, there's the whole mysteries too. So
those are fun.
Yeah, those are fun. They're a little different, and they were I did those just for the joy of it, and they really were joyful to write.
How about with your loyal readers? Are there books that you think they might have overlooked that they just haven't gotten to as much?
I bet we've all had this experience. I wrote 2 books a long time ago for Avon, Once More with Feeling and Twice Upon a Time. And the idea was that 2 women are involved in a car crash. And when the one woman wakes up, she's in the other woman's body. And to me, this was such a great starting place for a story and all the things that could happen if you wake up. And I used to, as a kid, imagine what it would be like if I closed my eyes and when I opened them again, I was someone else. What would that feel like? And so I really loved those books. I still do. I put them up as ebooks, and I don't think they ever got the play they should have gotten. And I wish more people read and appreciated them. But we don't know because it's our books. We don't know if they're, if that's something that's really going to appeal to readers, even if it appeals to us.
I'm going to nominate one here, Whiskey Island.
Oh.
I always loved that book.
I don't think that was overlooked. When I go back to Cleveland, that's the book everybody talks about because it's set in Cleveland and it's a historical saga about Cleveland. I loved that, and the next book in the series called The Parting Glass. And hey, I think I got the idea for that title when I was at your house, didn't I?
From playing that song.
Yeah, The Parting Glass. I went, oh my gosh, there it is. There's a sequel.
Yep. It's such a wonderful song too, but those are great books. And I don't hear as much about them, I think, as your more recent single titles. So maybe that's why I haven't been to Cleveland lately, so I didn't know.
Well, and they're old now. They're older, so that you don't really hear much. And they're not out anymore. They're not only ebooks, but they are just ebooks at this point. So they're not in print.
But if people read ebooks, they should grab them.
I think
so.
I hope they do.
Tell readers where they can find out more about you and your books.
Okay. Well, I have a website, and it's easy. It's my name, EmilieRichards.com. And then I'm on Facebook it's called the Emilie Richards Reader Page. And I also have a readers group called Read Along with Emilie Richards on Facebook, which is fun because we just talk books and there's nothing else going on except talking books. And I'm on the usual places, Twitter, Instagram, all those things. So I'm easy. And then I blog twice a week, and I offer giveaways on my blog, and I have what we call the Sunday Inspiration blog, which I do with my husband, and it's usually just something inspirational for people to think about for the week, and that's really been well followed by people. They enjoy that.
Well, and I will say we'll have all the URLs on the show notes. But in case you're listening and not going to look at the URLs, be aware that Emilie is spelled with an IE at the end of Emily.
Yes, thank you.
To find that,
journalist,
the journalist coming out,
yes,
who thinks there's 48 ways to spell Daryl,
and who knew, right?
Yes. So you've talked a little bit about your most recent book, and when is the next Mirror coming out? What is it? The Other Daughter? No,
The Perfect Daughter.
The Perfect Daughter.
I'm on longer space between deadlines now. I asked for that, and so that I can do some independent things too. And so I don't think we have a date. I don't think it'll be out. I know it won't be out in 2018 because it's not due till the end of the year. So it'll be out sometime in 2019, probably in the summer.
Okay. To make that clear, though, there may be some other releases that you're doing independently.
Yes.
During 2018. Oh, good.
I'm putting up some of my backlist, and I'm also doing a Shenandoah album anthology of novellas written about characters in the Shenandoah album series.
That's terrific.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have that out around Mother's Day. That's my plan.
And I will give you my very, very favorite journalist question. Is there something I should have asked you that I haven't, or something that I didn't ask that you'd like to answer?
Wow, I think you plumbed all the depths there. You did a great job. It was really fun.
Well, we still have more fun here because this is my very favorite part. These are rapid fire either or questions. You have to pick one or the other. And let's see, cake or ice cream?
Oh, cake.
Day or night?
Day.
Cowboy boots or hiking boots?
Hiking boots.
Toenail polish or bare toenails?
Toenail polish.
Dog or cat?
Dog.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee. Cruise
or backpacking?
Cruise.
Mountains or beach?
Beach. Sailboat
or motorboat?
Kayak.
I thought you were going to make it all the way through. Gardening or house decorating?
Gardening.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
Best china or paper plates?
Paper plates.
Mustard or ketchup?
Mustard.
And this is the last one. Save the best for last or grab the best first?
Save the best for last.
But there was hesitation there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think that one over. And it's situational.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much for taking this time and joining us on Authors Love Readers, Emilie. It was a delight. And I hope all the listeners will come and join us next week when we talk to another author. Have a great week of reading. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.